Welcome to the IR Global podcast. IR Global is the largest international professional services network. I'm your host of the IR Digital podcast, Jennifer Riggins. Today we're sitting down with three employment law innovators, reflecting on the last 6 months since the world flipped over, pandemic and a lot of other things happening, and how businesses can still be adaptable and survive or even thrive and be resilient overall. So we're talking to people from three different places. We have Rachida from Amsterdam, Rebecca from the LA area, and Shilpen, who's like me, living and working in London. Why don't you start off, Shilpen, in introducing yourself and tell us how your life has changed since March?
Thank you, Jen. My name is Shilpen Savani. I'm a fellow Londoner, as you correctly say, and I'm an employment lawyer based in the city in central London. How has life changed in the last few months? It's in some respects it's become unrecognizable. It's changed so much. I feel as if I've had a front row seat to how life has changed for my clients and for the people that I work with and advise. And especially in the business context, it's been a very turbulent period, as you might expect. And you cannot separate the business space and the workplace from what's happening in people's lives personally as well. And I think that has impacted very severely as well on how we work and how businesses are coping with the situation.
Rachida, please introduce yourself as well and tell us how your life has changed.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, as an employment lawyer, I have always had the sense that we are like society's thermometer in terms of what the economy does. And that sense has been particularly true during this pandemic that we have been experiencing in the past 6 months. To Shilpen's point, indeed, it was a front row seat at our clients. And we have seen clients who, were doing very well and others doing very badly. And for me personally, it has changed life on different levels, in the good sense and in the bad sense as well. Of course, the bad sense is that we cannot travel, that we cannot engage with friends, family, and clients in the same way that we used to do on a physical level. But from other sides, it has made us more efficient and more appreciative of things that we do have. So to me personally, the pandemic has also brought a lot of good.
I like that. So, glass half full, as it were. And I love the term society's economic thermometer that I will be asking you more about later. And Rebecca, if you can introduce yourself and talk about how your last 6 months have gone.
So I'm joining you from the other side of the ocean in Santa Monica, which is a small progressive city in Los Angeles County. I'm an employment law specialist focused on businesses with employees in California. And I found that for the most part during the pandemic, the litigation work has slowed down. And the focus is, for most of my clients, is how do I run my business in a world that seems to be changing every day, where it's impossible to make plans. One of the things that's happened for me, I think, probably the same with Rachida and Shilpen, is that I've become a resource for my clients on what other people are doing. There's not as much contact between people as they work from home or from offices with more isolation. And everyone wants to know what other businesses are doing to handle the challenges that face them, both in terms of their workforce and the economic stress on their business model.
I have to ask, how do you all know each other?
Well, Jen, we're all members of IR Global, as you know, but we've also come to become quite good friends, especially given our shared interest in employment law in our diverse jurisdictions. So we've got professional interests in common, but we're also really good friends, and we often share ideas and partner up as well from time to time.
I think your use of diverse jurisdiction was an interesting choice of words because yes, you're from 3 different countries, but you're also from 3 different very diverse areas of those countries and very integrated areas. And let's be honest, California could be its own country if it wanted to. And I think that makes it very interesting. You're also tend to be from progressive labor areas. I think it's very interesting what you all 3 of you have said is that you're a mirror for the industry. And I think I see that too, because as a marketing consultant, I'm also an external. Anyone that's with an external view is often the first ones to be cut for the jobs because they have contracts, they're not fixed fees, but you're seeing that through this perspective of all these permanent contracts and how businesses are trying to survive. And it's interesting, Rebecca, that you said it's impossible to make plans. Do you think that's true, or do you think that's just what businesses think?
Well, I think the businesses that are the best prepared for change are the ones who do have a plan. The question is, what plan do you need? I think it could be a contingency plan, or a pandemic plan seems ideal at this point in time looking back. But the plan has to be a plan that's very changeable. I think adaptability is the most important characteristic for businesses and probably for individuals at this point in time. And a plan that is set in place that people are trying to follow that doesn't allow for changes on a regular basis is a plan that's not really going to work. I think as we think about government benefits and programs in the pandemic, one of the things that we admire the most is officials or government agencies or bodies who can respond quickly and modify social programs or regulation or other aspects. In California, we don't have a lot of outdoor restaurants, even though we have great outdoor weather usually. But one of the things that's happened locally is that just like in Europe, the businesses are being allowed to take over parts of the sidewalk and have outside dining. And so, of course, that's lovely, maybe less lovely in a pandemic, but also something that governments have allowed people to change. And so just like governments, I think businesses who can't adapt quickly to modifications that need to happen in order to allow business to continue in a healthy and growth mode are businesses that are going to suffer the most, whether they have a plan or not.
Yeah, London's going through the same, I hope it stays, strange benefit of COVID is that it's embracing terraces for once, which most of Europe has, but London lacks. And it's just lovely to be able to sit outside and eat finally, and socially distance still. When you talk about contingency planning, I guess a lot of each of your clients has some form of contingency plan. Maybe it's just a legal guideline of what to do if this happens, or in terms of potential bankruptcy, things like that. Are there specific items that should be on a so-called COVID contingency plan?
Jen, I for one was surprised by how few clients had a contingency plan that could deal with this type of thing, as in, yes, you manage your cash flow. Yes, you manage where you think you'll be next year. You've got a business plan, but very few businesses, no matter the sophistication or the size, had actually ever planned for such a big societal change, and certainly not for such a comprehensive shutdown of society, which we've seen this year. So actually, I think contingency planning has been something that I've spent a lot of time sort of educating clients about, basically, and especially because we've been a mirror to the business, to a number of different business sectors. It means business advisors like the 3 of us have been able to hopefully pass on some good advice as to how to basically respond and react to these unprecedented challenges.
Rachida, what sort of advice are you offering your clients about that?
Well, any advice at this point in time, or in hindsight since mid-March here in the Netherlands, was really mitigating the crisis impact, and trying to think of solutions within the very limited legal frameworks that we had and still have. I agree with Shilpen that to me it was also really striking to see how many companies actually were not prepared for a crisis of this scale. There were some who were prepared. I think Wimbledon was one of the very few organizations that had an actual insurance policy for a pandemic. So that was a really brilliant move of the person who was in charge of that. But I don't know of any other organizations or companies that on a large scale that had such policies in place, insurance policies in place. And what I did see is that in the first 2 months or so, many companies were in this state of panic, that really they did not know where to start, what to do, because everything needed to happen at the same time, while at the same time there was a huge uncertainty about where the economy was heading, where the sales were heading, whether they would exist in a few weeks or a few months. Once that settled in a little bit, that was actually the moment that contingency planning was put on the agenda. So it only came afterwards instead of where you would typically think of a contingency plan before disaster strikes. And that is, I think, a lesson learned for many companies, especially because taking the warnings of government and medical experts that this is not a unique situation that we find ourselves in, that this virus may be changing on the go, and we need to be able to adapt to it as well. So it will require a different way of running businesses. It will require more preparation and agility. There where we used to see that it was enough to be like a large container ship going on the cruise control modus, and that was sufficient. COVID-19 has taught us that we all need to be, in speedboats, and we need to navigate our companies in an agile and flexible way. We need to be able to adapt constantly. Exactly like Rebecca said, you need to be prepared for flexibility.
So instead of contingency planning, some sort of adaptability planning. How does remote work fit into that? How does enabling work from home or enabling your team to be successful working from home?
Well, I think it is very important, but this is that remote working and changing the way we organize people and workers is something we knew for a very long time that it was necessary, but there was never a need to implement that in a structured and sustainable way for the future or as one of the norms. Actually, we were seeing a development of introducing open offices or the office garden space. Well, I don't think that's a good idea anymore nowadays. So all those open offices need to go as well, and we need to go to more like cubicle type of work or individual offices. And remote work offers a big solution to ensure that people can stay safe, can stay healthy, that you can prevent infections on a wider scale within your organization that can be paralyzing for your business. So this pandemic has forced us actually to embrace technology, to embrace the future, and to do things differently.
I agree with you, Rachida, and I think the wider theme of adaptability is really important, and it's been highlighted like never before in the last few months. And adaptability in the workplace, which has been affected so severely in the sense that we may never see what we thought was the normal way of working again. And I think especially the expensive central city-based sort of workspaces, which have attracted such a premium for decades, if not centuries, I think are very much up for discussion right now. And it'll be interesting to see if we even need them anymore. As in, I personally think we're going to go for a more decentralized, more localized type of living and working, which will have a direct impact on that. And it's going to rely more and more on sort of flexible and creative ways of working. It doesn't necessarily have to mean working from home, but I think it will not be the same as, the rush hour with millions of people, coming in from the suburbs and going into the city, at a fixed time every day. I don't think we'll ever see that again, or not for the foreseeable future.
I do see how businesses who were able to revert quickly to an alternative model, working from home, working in smaller groups, in smaller locations, maybe eliminating some positions that were publicly facing. I think the position that I've seen disappear the most quickly is the receptionist position, because there aren't locations where a lot of people are coming in to have meetings or to visit people's offices or to check people's credentials before they go into a business. That position is, for the time being, mostly been eliminated. So I think that businesses that can come up with a model that begins to work for them, that's responsive to the times, is the business that's going to succeed the most quickly. There are obviously businesses that need a local presence. I think one of the most obvious ones is, for example, fulfillment centers, the people that stock the boxes for the Amazons or the grocery vendors, or the people that are shipping things out to people who are trying to order things from home as opposed to going out to shop or to run their errands. I work with a couple of those, and I don't think there's any real solution on how to do it exceedingly safely. But also the workers need access to the products so that they can put them into the stream of commerce. Other areas, for example, healthcare, it seems that it was impossible for people to receive healthcare remotely, but now it's clear that many procedures and many consultations can be done with medical professionals not interfacing face-to-face with consumers or individuals.
Which I frankly like. Instead of having to make a last-minute GP appointment and risk everything that's in there, if my kid has a rash, email a photo, get a prescription sent to my nearest pharmacy, go pick it up. It's great.
I agree, Jen. This comes with a lot of utility and kind of convenience at the moment, but I worry about the real implications of social distancing. I was just thinking the other day that for now, when you're reading a book or when you're watching a movie, it's recent enough for us to remember how things were previously. But look ahead to 6 months or a year or two of this happening, and will it seem strange for us to see crowds together, basically, or to see artwork which shows a time before we had to be so concerned about social distancing? And that, I think, is going to impact on not just, as I say, the workplace, but I think on normal life and how we all interact with each other as well.
What can organizations do now? What is their responsibility to their employees, especially if they are places that maybe half of all Amazon staff have to be co-located. The other half can probably comfortably work from home for sales support and tech, but the rest, those running the infrastructure centers and the fulfillment centers, there's no way. They have to be there. How would a company, or any company that is doing the mix of retail online and the physical product, how would they, for example, balance those two very different sets of employees and the responsibility if someone gets sick?
Oh, I was going to say, I think safety comes first. And one of the things that people weren't really ready for, because none of us, I don't think, have lived through a pandemic, at least in America, is the importance. Safety, of course, was always important, but it was a footnote, not a major concern. Now I think that it has to be the main focus, And the planning and agility needs to recognize the need for safety for individuals and for employees while coming up with new ways for it to work. I work with a company that does risk management, and they're basically have become safety consultants now, and they go to different workplaces. There's a lot of different things in different workplaces that work. They seem to all be a combination of barriers and safety equipment and distancing and thinking through new processes so that there's less skin-to-skin contact and less proximity to other individuals. But I think it is, it's like a puzzle. I think every workplace needs to figure it out themselves. And it is something that's very important for people to be intentional about. It's not one size fits all or something that we can all ignore and it'll go away. I think the one thing that we've learned from this is that, I think as Shilpen pointed out, is that there will be other pandemics most likely in the future. And the things that we learn now are things that we can apply later on.
Shilpen, you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say something along very similar lines to Rebecca, which is, an employer has a positive duty, especially in English law, to maintain the safety of the workplace and the welfare of workers. And that has, of course, massive implications. It's come very much to the fore in the current climate, which once again brings the focus and the spotlight back onto whether people will be working in an office space and can their safety be ensured for so long as this pandemic is there. Personally, my perception of this is that I think the distancing and the concept of social distancing is here to stay for the foreseeable future now. And that will impact on the way that we set up workplaces, etc. as well. As Rashida's already touched on this, I think the open plan office concept, for example, already starts to feel a bit dated unless there are safeguards in place to create pods, to create partitions, and the ability to at least bring partitions in when needed.
What is the next step? How do companies, so there are external consultants, or in the UK, there are government COVID checkers that allow businesses to reopen or not. I'm not sure I have full faith in all of those. I'm not sure. I think it's definitely varied by where you live, what information is out there. The government here is saying, go dine out. We'll give you a discount this month if you dine out. The government here is sending everyone to dine out, but then not all places have terraces, and they're encouraging people to go in air conditioning, which is a super spreader. So it's definitely one of those things that it's about what science the government is supporting in each place and what policies each place, is part of your role as employment lawyers now to help keep your clients up to date on what the flavor of the week's government policy is, what each phase means. I think there's colors in Amsterdam or the Netherlands. They've got colors, we've got numbers. They're changing everywhere. Is part of your role now becoming a translator for COVID?
I do think that there's a dialogue on what the newest approach is and what resources are available. I find that most of the people I work with are very up to date. They're listening to the news, they're watching the news, they're accessing websites. I think it's difficult for lawyers to provide safe and true resources that will work today as well as a month or two from today. So I think what we do is we just tell people to keep abreast of the developments. It's a responsibility, I think, of business owners. And as easy as it would be to rely on a consultant or a resource, I don't know that there are any resources that are completely up to date that take away the responsibility of business owners to keep abreast of what's happening. I think there is just so much change going on. It's something that everybody is focused on, and it certainly is an everyday dialogue with me as I speak with clients.
How is your role changing in this time? Are you doing more temporary contracts, or are organizations looking to limit their risk in employment in some ways. Are lawyers, are businesses now getting sued if there was an outbreak and they didn't socially distance early enough?
Well, I think in California and the United States, there is a flood of litigation in the employment context that will be specifically addressing many aspects of the economic downturn and the safety concerns. I was just reading yesterday that our occupational safety agency called OSHA was seeing a huge uptick of whistleblowers blowing the whistle on employers that they didn't feel were being safe enough. So there's going to be, I think, just waves of that here. I'm actually spending more of my time on advice. I think people are trying to be more proactive, and the court systems aren't quite up and working, mainly because of our jury trial constitutional right here. There just very few examples of cases that have gone to jury trials, and so there's a big backlog of litigation, and that's sort of reacting against the tide of new theories of liability and litigation that will come from it.
Rachida, what about in the Netherlands? What are you seeing as your role changes?
Well, indeed, it has resulted in our role and what clients are asking from us to change. In particular, what we see is, the Dutch legal system has not been changed to adapt to the reality and the impact of COVID-19 to society and to how employees and employers engage or work. And that means that employers basically have an existing set of rules that needs to work for these very, special circumstances. And it does lead to tension in terms of privacy laws, tension in terms of what can you expect in terms of own responsibility from employees, but also dilemmas now that we have seen a loosening of the measures, for instance, that we are allowing tourism to start up since mid-June. That does result in a tension between that as an employer, you have the duty to ensure a safe work environment, but at the same time, there is legislation that prohibits you from asking an employee if they were on vacation in a code orange country. So they could be bringing the virus into your company and you do not have the legal tools or means to do a check. So I do think that we are reaching our limits as to what we can demand from employers without demanding also a little bit of own responsibility and maybe less freedom from employees as well. And against that background, those are the type of questions that we get from our clients. So how to juggle all of these different sets of rules and regulations and what we are experiencing in practice, the company needs. How do we allocate and align the company needs with the existing sets of rules that are actually no longer fitting the situation? So that means that we need to be creative. And sometimes, you need to spell out the different options. Some options will be in the green zone. Some options will be, between the orange and the green zone, and some options will be outside of that green zone. And it is then a business decision for employers if they want to take that calculated risk. And sometimes business demands that you do take a risk. And then it is up to the courts to decide whether your decision was made justly, whether it was proportionate, whether you considered all the pros and cons, if you have considered the employees' interests, and all of that comes together in the way we engage with our clients and advise them. So we try to take a very broad perspective to a legal question, and it is asking more from us than just explaining how the law works. We are becoming truly business advisors and business partners, and we are taking joint risks with our clients.
I couldn't agree more, Rachida. You're absolutely right. I find my role has become more and more of a business advisory role. Because ironically, on the one hand, the law has not changed. There hasn't been the time for the law to change or to adapt to what's happening. But at the same time, what we're dealing with and navigating is huge governmental programs which are intended to try and shore up the economy and stabilize the economy, which in turn has major consequences for employment rights and rights in the workplace. This means we've had no choice but to become much more rounded in our advice and much more commercial in our advice. I mean, for me, the greatest example of this has been where, especially in the panic stages of the pandemic, when clients were rushing for the exit basically and looking to basically offload huge swathes of their workforces and their employees. And with the viewpoint that I had, I could see that the government was working on something to come. And a lot of the work that I ended up doing was to try and stop employers from the knee-jerk reaction of just losing staff fast, basically, and waiting to see what was coming from the government to try and prevent a complete meltdown, economic meltdown. And sure enough, those who waited realized fairly quickly that this was a bigger problem than just their own business for once. And this wasn't a recession. This was, not just a national, but a global issue that has forced every government into taking action of some sort or other.
What's interesting is what y'all are saying about the movement from being strictly lawyers to business advisors. That's actually something, well, even before the pandemic and hosting this podcast, I've heard a lot of. There's a lot of going to advice because it's not something like a building contract or something that's more tangible than that. It's about human lives. So it is not, no matter what the law says, it's very gray. And your roles are very much dealing with humans, which I guess all lawyers are, but when you're dealing with employers, they need to understand the consequences, and there's just such complex laws, depending very much on your jurisdiction and how you can help everyone feel safe at work, both physically, like safe from a pandemic, but also safe that they still have a job, and how they communicate that, because I guess part of your role is also how they communicate when they do have to make those massive layoffs and redundancies, and how to do that correctly and how to decide who is appropriate or not for that. It's a very difficult time of rapid change, but it sounds like all of you are doing very well in it. So congratulations. Is there anything else I should be asking you that you want to talk about, some of the friction of, or some of the upsides of what's happening now?
What I have also been witnessing is that the pandemic has actually forced chief HR officers or HR professionals to really cooperate together with CFOs and people from the business. Before this pandemic, in many companies, you would see these different professionals and very important roles within companies acting as silos. Whereas through COVID-19, we've seen them team up and actually come up with really good solutions and putting the human factor or the human capital factor back on the agenda and back in the boardroom where it belongs. And I really do hope that this development will continue and be something of a more sustainable nature in future. And that we really do start to see the human factor as one of the most important factors within a company that can make or break a company. Especially in this, well, let's call it the new normal, or the reality where we will need to find new ways of working together, be it remotely or in different forms. It will require a different form of leadership. It will require a different allocation of resources. And I think that when the coronavirus hit, it attacks people. it does not attack machines. It does not attack something else. It attacks your employees. So I do hope that it will result in, our interest in employees' well-being, and organizing them in a better way, in a more sustainable way, will be a good lesson that will help us progress from here onwards.
I agree. I think as we come out of the initial sort of panic and survival phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, and go through this period now of sort of reflection and grasping or reaching for recovery, I think it actually presents a really interesting opportunity to reconsider work and the meaning of work in society, and really the future of work. And what I'm hoping is that this will lead to some interesting approaches, because if you take it as a given that trying to retain your skills and your workforce is a good thing, in other words, rather than just wholesale dismissals of staff, if you can find ways to retain your staff, that I think naturally leads you to being more creative about how you do that, basically. And I think whether that leads to a greater uptake of the gig economy, and in a more secure way, but in a way that still allows flexibility, and that could be in the form of what we call 0-hour contracts over here, or whether it's in the form of encouraging job sharing. In other words, it's better to keep 2 jobs rather than losing a job if you can. But also, I think the bigger question, the interesting question that comes out of all this, and we may not know the answer for a few years to come, is whether we're going to shift gradually to a 4-day week, for example, which is something that if we were ever going to achieve it, might be now.
Yeah, and to that point, Shilpen, I definitely agree. I think it might also be worthwhile to start thinking in output instead of hours. I mean, the general rule is that we contract employment for an X number of hours per week, whereas maybe we should be contracting based on a specific result, and that is something that we would copying from the gig economy, but we can implement that very easily into a framework of employment as well. And if we have one employee who does the work in 40 hours per week, that's fine. If another employee does exactly the same output in 20 hours a week, that's fine too.
I agree. And I think that's what's interesting is, for those who are open-minded enough, when they're doing their future planning, businesses that are willing to, I think, revisit these issues and take a fresh look at things, will find a lot of really good answers and solutions, I think, for the future.
I think this new business challenge requires a new kind of leadership too. A leadership style that's able to work with people whether they're in front of you or not. The ability to meet people where they are emotionally as they're dealing with the new constraints and challenges in their lives with social distancing. And the kind of manager who can work with a team and help them figure out what they need to do differently so that they can accomplish the kind of productivity or accomplishments that they hope to achieve individually in their job. I think one of the things that I've seen as the biggest challenge with the changes that have happened has been how to keep a company culture, or how to develop a company culture without the normal interactions that people in companies normally have. And I think that's another open question that people need to rethink and figure out in this changing world what the next phase of their business is going to look like, both in terms of the people management and also the facilities and the location of its workforce. But I do think that the interpersonal, emotional, psychological piece of management is the piece that's going to be the most challenging for most people, because it isn't business as usual anymore. It's a new world that requires new skills and new ways of interaction, new forms of communication, in order to keep people together working towards common goals in a cohesive way.
Absolutely. So I challenge each of you, and I didn't tell them before, so we'll see what happens, to wrap it up by giving me one word to describe the future of work and employment.
For me, Jen, it's flexible.
I think I've shared mine already. I think adaptability is the key, both for workers and also for managers and for businesses as they develop their new model.
Well, I wish I could give a very creative answer, but I will give a synonym as well, which would be agility.
Fair enough. Controversial use of the word synonym there, but I really like it and I agree with it. Thank you so much, Rachida, Rebecca, and Shilpen, for this just great conversation we had to reflect on. We're not going to call it the new normal. The 2020, reflecting on business and employment and human beings and hiring them in 2020. And thank you, listeners. These IR digital podcasts are meant to be educational resources from experienced lawyers like we have today, accountants and financial advisors with extensive knowledge on topics that you as professionals just simply need to know about. To learn more about IR Digital and its services, please visit irglobal.com. And if you found this episode useful, please consider sharing it. Give us a review, give us a like. It helps everyone. Tell your friends. And if our listeners want to touch base with y'all and maybe learn about your law practices and services in each of your jurisdictions, you've told me that they can find you on IR Global or, of course, LinkedIn. I really appreciate each of your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Stay safe.